Welcome to the Carasoft Data Center Innovation podcast series, where we dive into the trends and issues shaping the future of data centers in the public sector. I'm your host, Carasoft Consulting CTO Scott Robon. Today, we have two guests from AMD to discuss what they're seeing in the data center environment. They are Derek Dicker, Corporate Vice President. I'll record that again. 3, 2, 1. Derek Dicker, Corporate Vice President, Enterprise and HPC Business Group, and Michael Detweiler, Senior Manager, Enterprise and HPC Business Group. We'll touch on data center modernization, how supply chain diversity and security impact the data center, the development of open standards for the data center today, the emergence of neo-cloud providers, and other related topics. Derek and Michael, it's great to have you both here with us today. Can you give listeners a brief intro, your history in the data center world and your role today? And Derek will ask you to go first.
Fantastic. First off, Scott, thank you so much for having us here with you today. As you suggested, I'm with AMD, responsible for the EPIC portion of our business, and specifically in the enterprise and HPC space. In terms of background, I've been in the industry for a little more than 25 years, spanning large-scale companies like Intel, couple mid-cap semiconductor companies that have since been acquired, like Integrated Device Technology and PMC Sierra, and most recently before joining AMD at Micron in their storage business unit.
Very good. Michael?
Yeah, again, thanks for having us. I have actually been at AMD for 24 years now, doing specifically server-related activities for over 15 of those years. So roles varying from inbound and outbound product marketing to working closely with our OEMs to drive the right designs to helping drive the sell out of our technology into end users across the enterprise and HPC and service provider space.
Very good. Well, wherever you sat organizationally, we've all seen this really interesting evolution of computing components, over the last 3 decades. And certainly AMD has had an interesting journey there in impacting the ecosystem. Derek, you want to take us through a little bit of that transformation, and Michael, you fill in where that's important given your relative time at AMD?
Yeah, first off, fantastic question and an amazing story. And Michael, I would love to have fill in some of this, only because he's been here to see a bunch of it. What I would maybe do is just highlight the fact the company is approximately 55 years old, but for the purposes of this discussion, we'll just talk about the last decade. Dr. Lisa Su came in as the CEO of the company, and if you look at the trajectory of the business in general, just an incredible set of accomplishments that have occurred. Specifically in the data center, there was essentially an exit from the server CPU space with Opteron and a period of time where the company was revisiting how to re-enter into the space. And EPIC itself was introduced into the industry as an alternative. The industry definitely was seeking choice. The value proposition that the company envisioned and what they built on over the last 5 successive generations of EPIC have led us to where we are today, which is essentially almost 40%, just shy of 40% revenue market segment share in the industry. And it's been an incredible journey of focus on not just industry-leading technology, but also a deep partnership with our customers in terms of listening to what it is that they were interested in, building innovative solutions to deliver it, and then deterministically executing on every generation over time. But I'd say that's kind of the high level. Michael, anything that you'd want to add?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. The one thing, as you said, customers embraced us with open arms when we got back into the server space. And I think initially a lot of that was based off of, I want to have price leverage, right? Because choice in the market means that you have leverage. But the reality is when you have choice, that breeds innovation. And so as Derek was talking about, with each generation, we've continued to execute and add to our value proposition from a technical standpoint that are things that customers want to see. And so we've built these deep customer relationships across the OEM space and end user space, really value their feedback. And I think that's really, like I said, I think it's kind of short-sighted just to say, yeah, we want price leverage. The long-term play here is you want the innovation on both sides, right? Yes, we're AMD. We want to dominate the market, but competition is good, and we want to see competition from the other side as well.
Well, we've seen that very clearly in the CPU market, just as you laid out, right? And we don't have the same situation in the GPU market today. We'll touch on that as we go through the conversation today. But your comments on having to pay attention to your customers and your integrators, those are two very different motions. What are the end customers looking for? And you're very dependent on the integrators, the systems that house your chips to get them to market. What are the differences like in listening to those two different types of very important constituencies?
It's a fantastic question, because to your point, these are different audiences that AMD has very intentionally chosen to engage. A lot of the work that we do with end customers starts with what are the largest challenges that exist within their infrastructure. And that could range anywhere from, we're looking very intensely at how to add more AI infrastructure and we're bursting at the seams in our data center. It could also map to, we just had a fairly large increase on our licensing costs that showed up for our virtualization solutions. It could range to, we're operating with fewer resources in our IT group, and we need to find ways to intelligently get more efficient. Starting with the end customer's challenges is absolutely job one for us, and it's something that we absolutely obsess over. We then take that feedback and map that back into the products that we're all considering to build. And in partnership, you describe them as integrators with original equipment manufacturers and original design manufacturers, both OEMs and ODMs.
Sure.
We'll sit down and look at, what are they hearing? We don't talk to all the end customers. Of course, they have an incredible wealth of knowledge and experience too, but we partner very closely with them also to understand what do they believe can add value, as well as, it's important for them to have places where they can add differentiation. So a lot of the work that we do is built on top of industry standards, and then considering their requirements and requests that afford them the ability to invest on top and to innovate on top. But that's how I look at those two motions.
Sure. Well, certainly, the impact on supply chain diversity and security matters here too, right? Especially, majority of our listeners are U.S. federal government and broader public sector. Say more about what it took to bring supplier diversity and supply chain diversity into the data center market. Any particular highlights over the last decade from either of your perspectives?
I got started if you
I'll kick
want.
it off.
Okay, go
Actually,
ahead.
Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, supply chain diversity isn't just a government or federal government sort of topic, right? I think we all lived through the COVID age, right, where
Sure.
there was not just in the server space. It seemed like every market there was supply chain chaos and lead times and price fluctuations and things like that. In the server space, we certainly saw it. It seemed like there were different components that were on allocation or shortages that go into these servers, and they weren't always on allocation at the same time. So you had this kind of expanded, sequence of time where people felt some pain, right? In terms of they needed compute and they had to wait to get it or pay a higher price to get it. And so it's not just a government problem. It's absolutely critical. And I think this plays into kind of what I touched on before, which is, customers want choice. And it's not just for the reasons that I outlined before, which is, okay, price leverage and breeding innovation, because you don't want to have to face those challenges. You want to have options in case something happens from a supply chain standpoint. So it's really, really critical. But also at the same time, we don't want to just be seen as an alternative to Intel. Like we've had several generations now of technology leadership that are solving customer problems like Derek was talking about in terms of, maybe they need to free up space in their data center or lower licensing costs and things like that. When you have the technological advantages that we've had, it's not just, we want Intel to be the alternative to AMD and not vice versa.
No, understood. More to add, Derek? Yeah.
I would only add that we continue to see interest from the customer base to explore how we can become more resilient within our own supply chains, and we've taken steps to go do that. The infrastructure that we choose to use from a foundry perspective it ranges across a number of the players in that space. We did recently announce that we delivered our first next generation EPYC products coming out of the Arizona fab for TSMC as an example of that. And we'll continue to look at that, knowing full well that for audiences like the audience that you have here for this podcast, that's critically important. It's high on our radar.
And to your point, I think Michael said it, supply chain diversity is not just a US federal government issue, right? Everybody cares about that to a certain extent. We just see it heightened, when mission and other, national security related items come to the top of the pile where a bright light gets shown on it. We believe it's, even more important in government environments, but the fact that you both cover federal government and commercial, gives you a broader view of what's happening in the entire market and helps you bring, stuff that's getting commercial adoption to federal customers. And I think that's super healthy, especially with the increased use of the term dual use today. Like in the last 6 months, I've heard more and more industry folks talk about helping bring commercial tech to federal government problems. And it's not new. It's been happening for a long time, but the increased focus on it, I think, is really good. Now, data center modernization efforts are a real opportunity to say, hey, this is what we're seeing in the majority of our commercial base. We think this will fit really well for these, federal applications. What strategies is AMD employing to help organizations go through their data center modernization activities?
So I'll kick this one off just briefly, and then let Michael talk a little bit about some of the solutions that we're providing in this space. As we mentioned before, a concentration and a focus on the end customers is a very big focus of AMD's. And as we've gone out and spoken with those who run some of the largest data centers, even mid-sized data centers and small and medium businesses, particularly in the larger scale deployments, what we're hearing is that people are experiencing almost a bursting at the seams, if you will, in their existing data centers. And that puts quite a bit of pressure on things like space and power and cooling. And in looking at what opportunities exist to create room for AI workloads, it's a brand new set of work that's coming into these infrastructures. We often get the question of, what options exist for us to address and compress our footprint with our existing products. And the beautiful thing is that EPYC and the technology that's utilized is purpose-built with a mind for how to enable consolidation within the data center. And there's a number of different case studies that we have available that we make publicly available for people to look at that show things like server consolidation levels of 7-1 using existing infrastructure based on alternative solutions, mapping it to 5th gen EPYC-based solutions. So there's a handful of these that we've seen actually in real world practice by working closely with our customers that we've been able to help them realize. But maybe, Michael, you want to add a little bit more to the story?
Yeah, so there's an interesting stat that if you look at like data center vacancy rates, I think it's something like there's a 3% vacancy rate in the US
Wow.
of data centers. So like historically low levels. And so what are the solutions there, right? Like, okay, we can build more data centers. Well, that's really expensive, but the data centers are being built every day. Or I can make better utilization of the space I have and not have to sink all that money into, building new data centers or redoing my infrastructure, things like that. So that's where we think we have a really compelling solution. Yes, we are an ingredient in the servers that are purchased and go into these data centers, but it's a really important and critical ingredient because we're providing the performance, the aggregate performance, the socket performance, the per core performance, the power efficiency that allows people to do more with their data center space, whether it's draw less power or make better use of the power they have, make better use of the space they have, which frees up space for the AI workloads that are coming. So we think we have a really compelling value proposition from a technical standpoint that, like I said at the beginning, the overall problem here is that as Derek put it, people are bursting at the seams. There's just not space to expand, and so they have to come up with creative ways to make better use of that space or spend a whole lot of money to create space.
Yeah, I think like most things, you need multiple options available for you to optimize on, right? And there's so much focus in new data center construction and just delivering more energy to a facility
Mhm.
That's important, and it will that drum roll isn't going to slow down anytime soon. But also, can we get better efficiency, right? Whether it's lower power consumption on a per chip basis, more efficient use of space. I think you highlighted there. I need all the knobs to turn that I can to make the best use out of existing space. Um,
That's
well,
absolutely right. And I would say, some of the case study results that we've experienced for those with existing infrastructure is incredible. I mean, upwards of 80% reduced hardware TCO over 5 years. In some cases, a reduction of 50% in a reduction in software licensing costs over that same window of time. So there are opportunities out there for those who have been running and maybe even sweating their assets over some extended period of time.
sure.
The leap of technology and the advantages that are available to the customer base now are incredible.
I was going to be careful to not press you for any numbers, but thank you for sharing.
Those
It
are all
makes it a little
publicly
more
stated
concrete.
in case
Yeah,
studies, but
sure.
yeah, of course.
Yep. Yep. So one of the keys here to both playing a role in developing a more diverse ecosystem and driving modernization efforts is the development of standards and open components and operations in that whole ecosystem. I know we've talked before about some of the things that are happening in the industry on the openness front. What's most important to AMD, and what have you been involved with here from the open system perspective?
Yeah, maybe I'll also kick this one off. I think Michael did a really nice job before describing the feedback that we've received in the industry about the importance of choice, that customers very much are interested in making sure that they have options in their technology choices. We also fundamentally believe that competition breeds innovation and delivers the best end result for the market. From our perspective, we really kind of have three tenets that we build upon. The first is a broad portfolio. If you look at the products, particularly in the data center space, we not only deliver CPUs, we also deliver GPUs. And for those workloads that require a level of customization, there's also FPGA alternatives that are out there. The second is an open ecosystem. Everything that we build, we attempt to build around industry standards and then to put our software into the open source domain. And there's quite a bit of work that goes on in that space that Mike will talk a little bit about. And then the last is just making sure that we're delivering leadership innovation. And those three things we think work together to kind of form the nucleus of our strategy. But I think it would be particularly helpful for Michael to talk just a little bit about some of the software work that we're doing in open source, which I don't think always gets a lot of airtime. It's a substantial investment for the company, but then also the standards-based work that we're doing, where some of the interconnects that we've seen in the data center have ended up going vertical, going proprietary. And there's quite a bit of work in the standards bodies that we're leading with our friends in the industry to drive.
Yeah, as someone who's been at AMD for 24 years, you can probably guess that I'm somewhat passionate about this because like openness is part of AMD's DNA. And that is something that we believe in. It's not just lip service or marketing. Like we really do a lot to try to create an open ecosystem, both from a software and hardware perspective. So if you think about what we're doing on the GPU side or the Instinct accelerators, it starts with the software, right? And so we have this something that's called ROCm. For those who aren't familiar, it's an open software stack with tools, drivers, libraries, compilers, APIs, everything you need that's going to enable GPU programming from everything from low-level kernel to end user applications. And so, it starts there with an open ecosystem, and then you work on the partnerships, right, that are going to enable your products to work really well. So we partner with Hugging Face. There's hundreds of thousands of models
Sure.
that are available today that run on Instinct, right? And they're integrating ROCm into their open source libraries. We work with, and we were a founding member of PyTorch, and so our Instinct accelerators work with PyTorch, TensorFlow, JAX from a frameworks perspective. We've done a lot of work. Obviously we have a fierce competitor, and on the HPC side, CUDA is just kind of the known software that people code in. we actually have a tool that allows people to port their CUDA code over to something that's going to run on Instinct. And the beauty there then is that you have choice because you have a portable
Sure.
solution that runs both on NVIDIA and AMD. So then you have real choice in the market. And so that's, that's from a software perspective that, that's one area. I could go into other things, but that's a big one for us from the software side. On the hardware side, if you think about open standards, Derek mentioned from a network side, the scale out and the scale out and scale up networking. We've been, one of the driving forces behind a couple of really important consortiums. You've got the Ultra Accelerator Link Consortium or the UA Link Consortium, which is the whole charter there is to drive an open standard for accelerator to accelerator interconnects.
Yep.
Last I checked, there was somewhere around 100 members. So obviously, the industry is getting behind this. They see that this isn't just us trying to push something. The industry wants this. The industry wants open standards. There's somewhere, give or take, around 100 members there. And then from a scale out perspective, the Ultra Accelerator Link or UAL. UEC, the Ultra Ethernet Consortium. This is driving open standards for scale out networking. And again, somewhere between 90 and 100 members of that consortium. So you see this groundswell of support and desire from the ecosystem of wanting these choices in market. And, that is something that AMD absolutely believes in. We believe that it's better for the greater market to have these open standards and open ecosystem, both from a software and hardware perspective.
It really has been fascinating to see what's happening with those standards on the software side and the networking hardware and networking software side. With my engagement in the networking industry, I have this, kind of the story arc is those initial standards for telecommunications protocols took a lot of time, whether they're IEEE or IETF, right? For, defining how Ethernet hardware is going to be built to the entire networking stack and the very collaborative process through IETF to get standards ratified. Now we seem to be on the other end of that spectrum, and we'll be talking about this from an AI workload readiness perspective. The innovation in how to let agents communicate and access resources has been phenomenal and accelerated at a rate beyond anything I've seen in my career. Just to pick on a couple examples, Model Context Protocol, that just came out of nowhere last year, and now everybody's able to play with it. And I believe it's already been put under the guidance of the Linux Foundation, or maybe that's the agent-to-agent protocol. I can't remember which is which, but it's just taking off. And it highlights the importance of everything you just called out from the standards are important for open systems and interoperability perspective. And with Ultra Ethernet in particular, look, I know InfiniBand is an elegant solution to serve the HPC community for a very long time, but don't bet against Ethernet in the long term. I'll say it again. Do not bet against Ethernet in the long term. And to see the progress of the UEC here, it just makes sense, right? And InfiniBand will never go away completely, but the more and more footprint will be Ethernet over time. I think there's a great quote. I know I'm going to get it wrong, from Bob Metcalf, basically the progenitor of Ethernet. This may be apocryphal, but the quote goes along the lines of, I don't what networking will actually look like in the next 5 years, but it will be called Ethernet. So anecdotal evidence. Yeah, don't write any checks against that. But so you're working on an ecosystem to help move, from other environments to yours. And boy, AI tooling can be really useful for converting from one set of libraries to another as well. What else is AMD doing from a solutions perspective to help bring more workloads into the AMD ecosystem and bring more parity to that market for GPUs?
Michael, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, in all honesty, I'm not the GPU expert, so there's probably other folks that could answer it in more detail. But we have done a number of things. We've had a couple of key acquisitions actually. That a company called Silo AI that is doing a lot of work to provide kind of like hitting the easy button on providing some applications and use cases that customers, both enterprise and government, can use and that are optimized for our Instinct GPUs.
That is that's also a part of the AMD story that I think isn't super well known, Scott, at least to the broader audience. The first piece is that when we look at AI, we believe that the manifestation of AI workloads is going to come in many different shapes and sizes and forms. And the power that we believe AMD brings to the table is different architectures for different use cases. So if you look at it from the perspective of large scale training, we actually announced at the Advancing AI Day, Dr. Lisa Su announced a family of products on the Instinct side of the house that will be targeted at training, narrowly targeted at training. Our current Instinct families based on the MI300 family are all built and optimized in the inference space. In fact, Sam Altman took the stage, as did a number of other industry leaders, to talk about the work that's been done both on top of Instinct, but also in the ecosystem from a software perspective. But beyond that, there's also workloads that fit into CPUs. So our EPYC CPUs are actually very well suited for that. And then lastly, we have a whole family of GPU technology that comes under the Radeon brand that's available for the purposes of running, call it smaller scale workloads. And finally, all the way down to the client. AMD has a very nice portfolio of products under the Ryzen AI brand that are available both to consumers, but even more recently, there was an announcement that we had with Dell where we're now powering a portion of their commercial portfolio too. So that's, from a product portfolio perspective, we're attempting to play ball in each of those spaces. And by the way, lest I forget, our FPGAs that exist from the Xilinx side of the house, the former Xilinx side of the house. I would also highlight, the last piece is we realized that there is a lot of innovation that's occurring in this space. So as Michael talked about earlier, we're spending substantially investment dollars in the software portion of enablement, but we've also done things like acquiring a company, Silo AI, out of Europe that engages with a number of our customers to help put together solutions. And then lastly, there's recognition that customers are starting to consume AI technology, particularly on maybe some of the larger scale space at a rack scale level. And we just announced the closure of our acquisition of ZT Systems. So there are a number of different places where we're building up capabilities to assist the ecosystem to have options in the overall space and choice.
So that's a really good thumbnail sketch of what you bring. You have the right software and the right silicon for the right jobs, so to speak. Horrible oversimplification, and I've ripped that off from other environments I've used that for in the past. But there's a level of complexity, even dealing with a single supplier. And now if I'm somebody trying to build this infrastructure, I've got to make decisions across the industry, along with all the complications of all the advanced power and energy technologies, the new cooling technologies that are coming to play, increased structural load because Jensen wants us to be able to put 3,000 pounds of equipment in a single rack, and the raised floor won't handle that. I can verify that explicitly. There's this new class of potential providers called NeoCloud that could play a really interesting role here. Do you have a view? What does your NeoCloud engagement look like? And again, think about having a foot in each world. You see what's happening commercially. How might this apply to, federal government type customers?
Well, I think as a general comment, every time there's a major transition in an industry, you find a number of different models surface to try and serve need. And what we recognize is that not all enterprises can afford the cost of building out their own infrastructure for the purposes of realizing AI workloads. And the neoclouds that are coming out are offering the opportunity for different variants of options available to people to put their AI workloads in a location versus having to house it on-prem. There's also a substantial amount of work that goes into building up and instrumenting some of these systems. It could be, clusters and cluster management, the networking world that needs to be applied. And so we think that, the neocloud space, there's a ton of very interesting work going on there. We are actively involved with Instinct as well as with EPYC in those spaces and forging partnerships to build out some of the neoclouds in different regions around the world, by the way. So I'd say, our overall view of this is, we think that innovation is good for any ecosystem, and in particular in times of transition, that represents an awesome opportunity to engage a broader number of customers. In terms of the federal audience that's out there, I think just like we've seen in the commercial space where customers are looking to find ways to get engaged, to build out and deploy AI, but they don't want to necessarily spend those dollars out the chute. The neoclouds offer a great opportunity for somebody to get started in that particular path. And there's all kinds of interesting innovation that's taking place in that space.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think a couple really interesting factors come together here in terms of, the internet was this connectivity platform that allowed cloud to emerge. Cloud emerged much more rapidly than the communications infrastructure, and also brought us consumption models and payment models that we weren't ready for before. Now I think that could accelerate neocloud creation and adoption even further. And not to uh, point fingers at any particular pros or cons integrators here, but I've had conversations with just for example Booz Allen Hamilton, who's in a position to be able to construct neocloud type services with the right security requirements for their customer base. And I actually heard the CEO of Booz Allen on a Wall Street Journal podcast over the weekend, talking about some of this. So not trying to give free airtime to any SI, but like they've stuck out at me in the last few months as somebody who's really trying to make a difference there. Somebody you ought to talk to, and probably other federal system integrators as well. So.
Well, and not to belabor the point, but I think it's a really interesting value proposition and a differentiator for these near clouds where they can be very targeted and say, hey, this is going to be my purpose. I'm going to be very targeted at this sort of set of customers, and they can be very nimble in the choices that they offer and move quickly. And so, like Derek said, we're working with a number of them. There's dozens of them out there.
Yeah.
That are popping up, and we think it's a really interesting value proposition that they bring to the table.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I think it's super interesting in that not only will they be able to handle the physical electrical cooling requirements, they'll also be building their own orchestration layers, just like AWS did, just like Google Cloud did, just like Azure, just like Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. And they don't have to be compatible with each other, so to speak, but they have constituencies that they serve, right? And to be able to orchestrate not just the AI workloads, but also manage data, because data, as we know for training, I think it's really important. A couple people have mentioned that over the past couple years. So I'm being snarky. Of course, we know the data is super important for model training. So, well, as we try to wind this down, you've hinted at and talked very directly to the pieces of the puzzle that you bring to the table and having a multi-architecture strategy. What else comes to mind for you in that regard with taking your holistic view of the data center and what silicon goes where, what software goes where, and your relationships to help make it all work together?
I would say that the core of what we do and at the heart of what we care the most about is the end customer, and making sure that we're delivering products that address real business needs. And so there's an obsession that's applied to working with the end customer and then working our way back through the chain to where our design occurs. What I've seen inside the company that I think is super impressive is there isn't just this notion of, hey, there's an Epic team and an Instinct team and a Xilinx team and a Pensando team, and they all work independently. There is concerted effort to spend time asking the question of what's going on in the market, what are the leading users, the end customers' pain points, and how can we go solve those problems as a team, as one AMD. And that, I think, is based on my experience in the industry, it's unique. People will say they do that, but you won't necessarily see it manifest itself in terms of the solutions that get built or how the company operates. And that's something that the company endeavors to do every day. And that, I think, makes us unique in the industry. I think the other piece that I would layer on top of it is that there's been a history of promises made and commitments missed in portions of the market. And the one thing that I think AMD has done a really good job of, if the data certainly supports it, is deterministic execution across the product basis. And that's something that also sits at the core of the ethos of the company too. But I would definitely wrap it all around that. And then the last piece I'd highlight is there's an intense focus on building out solutions at a higher level over time. If you look at just the acquisition of ZT Systems that I mentioned before and the announcement of the Helios rack scale project, just an example of how we're stitching all of these things together to create complete solutions for the market for our customers, our end customers and our customers.
I'm gonna hang on to deterministic execution. Nobody likes variable or random execution. So
That's right.
yeah, set your clock by the software release, by the next generation of hardware, and so forth. Well, look, to you both, this has been a great conversation. Any final thoughts or things that you want to point people to as we close up for today?
Yeah, the only thing I would offer up is on our website, there's a number of case studies that describes the work that we've done with the end customer base. There's a fairly rich amount of those in there. And certainly if there's any interest to get engaged or learn more, please reach out to either of us. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you again for the time, Scott.
You bet. Michael, you get the last word.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, no, I was just going to say, if the people listening have found this conversation interesting and they are not as educated on what AMD can bring to the table from a technology perspective, whether it's on the server side or the client side or whatever, certainly reach out to your vendors, and we'd love to get engaged and carry on these conversations.
Well,
Like Derek said,
Caresoft,
it starts with the end customer, and that really is a maniacal focus from AMD. So we'd love to continue the conversation.
Roger that. And, Caresoft really appreciates the partnership that we have with AMD. As part of this Caresoft Data Center series, please reach out to us. We'll make sure we get you in touch with the right AMD people if you have more detailed questions. We greatly appreciate you coming here today. Thank you for what you're doing and educating us. Listeners, thank you for tuning in, and be on the lookout for the upcoming episodes in the Caresoft Data Center Innovation Series. Thanks, and we'll talk to you next time.